Yep. Hey, it's Kenny with Helicopter Online Ground School. Says we are live. Got some exciting news for you here. We're going to talk about student pilot breakthrough ahead with my one-on-one today. So this is an impromptu video. We were going to wait, but I was excited after we were done. And first, I got to tell you about Venture Helicopters. This is the first you've heard of them. This is the company that Helicopter Online Ground School is in cooperation with, that's going to be providing you flight training in the Schweitzer, formerly known as the Hughes 269 helicopter. This is the first that you've heard of it. Anyone's heard of it. I don't think anybody knows about this yet. You've heard us talking about the details, and this has been in planning stages for months, and really actually probably a year, but it's closing 1 week from tomorrow. So Jason from Venture Helicopters sent me the logo and said, go ahead and tell the world. So here's what will be coming. We're going to show you. There's one picture. There's two helicopters involved in this deal. This is number one, the flying helicopter that will be basically ready with Venture Helicopters pretty much a week from Friday. He's got students lined up and waiting. So Jason with Venture Helicopters is going to be doing flight training in this helicopter. He has students waiting, and they've been waiting, and everywhere he goes, they're like, he's getting new people. And the next helicopter we're going to go get probably a week from Friday is right here. There's a brand new engine sitting there on the dolly. So me and Hangar Dude Jimmy are going to be taking off with my Jeep and the trailer. We're going to go pick up this helicopter, bring back the helicopter and the associated parts. And we have just a couple pictures of all the stuff that's coming along with the helicopters there. And this isn't everything. It's coming with a whole slew of spare parts, which the beauty is, that's one of my problems with owning a helicopter and operating a helicopter, is buying the parts that you need. So Venture Helicopters, in association with Helicopter Online Ground School, are going to be doing flight training. And what's going to happen is Jason will be flying down in Lafayette, Indiana area with the first helicopter, and he will be providing flight training. And then we will have the second helicopter here, and we'll be using it for helicopter flight training with our members that want to come here. We've got an exclusive deal right now with the Unlimited Pro Pilot member where you can fly with me for an hour in this aircraft, get 6 one-on-ones, and get all of our training unlimited. You keep it. It never expires. One-time fee. Pretty neat deal on the website. So we're excited about all this. So you are the first to hear, if you hear on this video, our new partnership with Venture Helicopters. We are basically, aircraft will be under our operational control as Helicopter Online Ground School. We are insuring the helicopter with one of the best in the industry. Insurance man I've been using for 10 years. He is the best and insures more helicopters, I think, than anybody out there. So I'm going to grab my mic and carry it over here. Heather will be taking your calls, and not taking your calls. She's already talking to you in chat. Hang on while I move my mic. right, watch that little green thingy, Heather. Knocking stuff over. Tried being swift. I tried being swift today and go, I can just move this mic, no problem, as I kick it and make all kinds of racket. But you know what? This is an exciting day, and I don't care because I'm excited about everything going on, and I'm super excited about the one-on-one I had today with this pro member. And this was our third get-together, and I was thinking about waiting and doing this maybe tomorrow or the beginning of next week, but it was such a good session that I'm like, you know what? I was taking notes while we were going through, and I thought, again, this is stuff people want to talk about and they want to hear. They want to hear about people's struggles, and everything that he's been going through is common. So I'm just jotting stuff down today as we're talking. And number one, this was our third session today, and I was amazed. Right off the bat, he started saying, well, you know, when we started this, he was struggling to get to solo, and they were holding him back for a lot of reasons. And I helped him with the things we talked about in the last two, just mental preparedness, like going and sitting in the aircraft and going through the checklist with nobody around, taking your time with the battery off, and getting really good with the startup, practicing moving buttons and switches with no power on, and the slow, smooth, methodical, helping him with a lot of the radio stuff he was worried about and talking on the radio. I didn't do anything earth-shattering. We just talked about stuff. And he said right off the bat today, he goes, well, I got to tell you, I'm going to solo, like, shortly, like soon. I'm like, wow, you're there already? And that was when we started these 6, he's like, by the time we get done, hopefully I'm ready to solo. Within 2, he's like, my instructor said, hey, man, I don't know what you've been doing, but you've been up to something. And he hasn't told him that because I don't want to be involved and get between him and his instructor, right? Which is cool, right? It just, if I can help him, and I have, and it was exciting, so I wanted to share. So in 2 sessions, just little things that I was helping him with, and it's all easy stuff. And I told him near the end, he was like, yeah, I'm just so thankful for these. And I said, you know what? It really is about my 20-some years of struggling. It's because I've been beat up, chewed up, boot off stage kind of thing. I've made every freaking mistake. And we went back to my original failure with the private pilot and went back to a lot of the original notebook stuff. And it's just like, this works now because of me beating my head against the wall for so many years because I failed my private. I kept running out of money. I had so many struggles. Then I get my first CFI job and 9/11 happens. I mean, Jesus, and down the list. When I get to my 2,000 hours, I get in a helicopter wreck, and, I can't fly for a while because I have a back injury. Every freaking struggle there is, I've had them, right? So this stuff is fun, and we got talking, and the first one was I want to talk about the 2 sessions and how today was almost just kind of a review, and we were both excited by his progress. And again, I'll cover the other things that came up. So that was number 1, the process we made. So if you want to go to number 2, Heather. I told him, I don't think I want to tell the world about this, but I've talked about it in the past. So I thought, you know what? It's transparent. It's real. I'm going to tell you the story. In the last 2 sessions, if you watch the last 2 videos, live videos, actually, I'll put those links down below when we're done today, so you can go back and review those if you want. But today he was telling me how, in the last couple weeks, we talked through the ATC stuff and communications and radios, and I gave him the tips, the almighty tower god and all that stuff. And he said, what's probably helped me, one of the best things that's helped me? He goes, I've been going around with an earpiece in listening to live ATC. And I'm doing it at home when the kids are crying, and I'm listening when my wife's talking to me, and I'm listening, driving down the road. And he goes, I just spent a bunch of time listening in different environments, listening to live ATC in my ear on an earpiece. And I'm immediately thinking of barroom ground school. And so he goes on and explains in detail how much it helped him, again, mentally preparing, using the tips of just mentally preparing before going to do it. And as he's telling me the story, and he was so thrilled with his progress, and he's telling me how, I'm now got the lingo. I know the different controllers. I can tell who's laid back, who's more uptight. I'm catching on the lingo. How, they'll let you go when you leave the airspace. And so he learned so much by taking the time to just listen to live ATC. So when he's telling me that, I go, you know what? This reminds me of Jeff Kaza. And Jeff doesn't watch our videos too much because he is a helicopter CFI, but he's now a full-time law enforcement officer. He's the one that I've talked about in the past that I'm jealous because he keeps turning down shots at the aviation unit. They want him to go to the aviation unit, and he keeps turning them down because he's having so much damn fun on the street that he won't go to the helicopter section. Anyway, I trained Jeff back at one of my first jobs, and he was my star student back when I started as a CFI 20 years ago. The day I had my first 2 students go for check rides, and the first guy who I thought, man, he had his act together, and he dressed good, and he was a businessman, fresh, had a fresh biannual and a fixed wing. Check ride shows up, and I'm thinking, he's got it. He's got his gear. He'll be good. 5 minutes before the examiner walks in, he pulls out a copy of his medical. I've told this story before, I know. And I go, well, that's not going to work. He's like, well, that's going to have to work because this is all I got. And I thought, oh, great. My first check ride with the examiner comes in, of course, and goes, what's this? I can't give you a check ride copy. We need your medical. Well, you go deal with that. He's like, your number 2 guy, is he here by any chance? I'm like, yeah, he's here. Is he ready to go? And I go, I can go see. And he goes, go get your other guy, right? So student 1 goes away to go try to find his medical. He's got to leave, go back to his offices. So I'm starting off, new CFI, second job after 9/11, and the first job just went to nothing. So here comes guy number 2. The examiner's frustrated. I'm frustrated. Jeff comes in, so super prepared that by the end of his private, he made me look like a rock star. He looked like a rock star because his knowledge was dead on. And at the end, the examiner said, well, you were nailing everything 100%. So at the end of that private check ride, that was actually a commercial oral, and you didn't know it because I'll never let somebody go and not be stumped. And because you were answering every single thing dead on, I took it into a commercial just because I wanted to stump you, stuff I knew you wouldn't know about. And old Jeff goes, well, and this is where the term came from, and was our life 20 years ago. He's like, it's that barroom ground school with Kenny. He goes, when you're out at the club and there's girls dancing and you got a Bud Light in one hand and you got Kenny in the other ear going, what are the 5 things that contribute to your treating blade stall? What do you do in low G? And he goes, tells the examiner that me and a bunch of dudes would go out, and we did. And there was instructors and students both. And we'd go out, here and there, now and then. So we're out at the bar. Again, people everywhere, music going, but what we're always talking about helicopters, right? Because we were all obsessed, like most of you are who are into helicopters. It's an obsession, right? So that's where the term barroom ground school came up. And I identified when they were talking, or today when my member was talking, that's just what came to mind, right? Was Jeff, we joked about it, but he was, dude, I'm serious. If you can be out in that environment with loud music, people around you, and somebody in your ears go asking you question after question after question, and you can answer them, dude, you're ready for a check ride. So anyway, that's where the term barroom ground school came from. And, we used to do that years ago. I don't do that anymore. But, so there's the story. Again, I think you got the point, hopefully. And it was just exciting that he had made so much progress in communications just in the 2 previous sessions. Number 3, and this is YouTube interaction. You, our members and followers and people that just come and watch the YouTube videos, our last 2 live videos have done awesome. And they've done so much better than a lot of our past videos. And today I told him, I said, you know what? I told our member, I go, this is helping me so much. I'm happy that I'm helping you. But it's helping me too, getting right in, digging in fresh with somebody going for a rating right now. And it's bringing so much thought back to me and thought process back to me. And I've even used a lot of what we've learned in the last couple of weeks. I've produced 4 new videos this week on airworthiness requirements and certificates and documents. And because all this digging in fresh, talking about check rides and looking, hearing from a student on the other side, it changed the way I produce these new 4 videos I just made because I'm fresh deep into working with someone one-on-one that's at that point of solo and all the struggles a person runs into. So it was just really fun that, that all this stuff is coming up. And I told him, I go, thank you for doing this because it's helping our YouTube and it's helping our interaction because it's exciting stuff that people want to know about. And people are emailing us going, hey, do more of that. We know it's kind of long and drawn out and you got a lot of stories, but keep doing them. So that's why we're here. So I'm benefiting just as much as he's benefiting. And I told him, that's like we talked about yesterday. You're always learning. And we covered that again today. You're always learning all the time. Number 4, and we talked about this, something I had to tell him, and I marked it down while he was talking, because we didn't discuss this in the first 2, but I discussed it with him today, because somewhere in our interaction, I don't believe it was live, but he's been emailing me ideas and things that he was thinking about and talking about, and he mentioned the book, Everything You Need to Know You Learned in Kindergarten. And I brought that up to him today after him talking about everything he was learning and everything he was doing and how he was making progress. I said, I had written this down, so when you stopped for a second, I wanted to interject. I was glad he brought up that book because I think about this a lot, and I think about it ever since a Czech airman that came to train us on, I believe it was night vision goggles. And we were a EMS program that didn't have night vision goggles previously. So he has to come in as the Czech airman and give us training. And it's however many days and however many hours. And he was a Czech airman out of Texas and super nice guy. He was one of my favorite. And he came in and sat down and he goes, you know what, guys, before we get started, you know what you really need to know? You know what you need to know to be a good helicopter pilot? You want to know what you need to know to be a good EMS helicopter pilot and do well in your job and excel? He's like, ever heard of the book, Everything You Need to Know You Learned in Kindergarten? He goes, guys, that's really what you got to know. And at first you kind of go, what? And then when he gets talking and it's the simple stuff. It's, put your toys away when you're done. Be nice to others. All those things that come up that we learned in kindergarten, it's kind of the truth. And I'll talk a little bit about, basic private pilot 101. It's kind of like, what did you learn in kindergarten? Example, and I'll use it in the EMS base. We're responsible to go in, pre-flight the aircraft, get ready to go, move it outside, if you want to have it outside on a nice day, and then move it back in when you're done. Then it's the next guy's choice. Well, there was one pilot that, he was kind of a pain and always was a pain no matter what it was. And he liked to pull the aircraft out and then he'd always leave it out. He's like, I just left the aircraft out for you. And I'm like, I'd prefer you just put it back where you found it. You found it in the hangar, you pre-flight it, and you moved it outside. I'd rather you put it away. And then when I come in, I can start my pre-flight, start my shift fresh. That's what you learned in kindergarten. When you get your toys out when you're done, put them away. And so many of these things that we learn and we move into, it's really about going back to what is right, using common sense, basic private pilot, which we'll get to here in a little bit. But I wanted to mention that book because it's really important when you really think about this. Let's go on to the next one because I'm just going like crazy here. Breakthrough. So I'm realizing as I'm jotting down this and we get down, I write down breakthrough as he's talking. And I wrote down totality. And that means totality of the circumstance, a term I learned at the Indiana Law Enforcement Academy. And as he's talking today, he's just rolling, man. He's telling me how good things are going. And I go and I jot down breakthrough. And when he finally takes a break, I go, you know what? I jotted down and I wrote down breakthrough. Because he sat back and said, you know what, man? And I was just grinning as he starts telling the story. He's like, I finally figured out that it's really about wind. It's about communications. And it's about fuel. And he's like, that's what's really important. And as he went on, it kind of dawned on me. And I wrote fuel, communications, wind. And I titled that today because his whole conversation went to what's important. And what's important is flying the aircraft. What's important is understanding what you got to do to keep yourself alive. And all this, I'm going to call it crud. Like, if you're partway through your training, you're going to know what I'm talking about. Maybe you're where he's at and you haven't soloed yet, and your mind is so full of stuff because you're doing ground and you're doing ground with your instructor. Maybe you're using hogs. You're studying on your own. You're flying. You're trying to go to work. You're trying to spend time with your family, whatever it is. It's like this huge, overwhelming pile of information. Oh, my God, I got to know what, VORs are, and I got to know weather, and I got to know this, and I got to know that. And as he's telling the story, I'm getting the picture, right? I understand that he gets it now. It's like he's understanding that all these things are important. I shouldn't call it crud, but a lot of stuff that you're learning, some of it you're never going to use. Some of it is jumping through hoops to get through your written test. Some things you're just not going to use out in the real world. Those things are important, and you got to know them to get through testing and present yourself well to check ride. But what's really important, and when he went fuel and wind, man, I'm like, yes. That's why we harp on fuel all the time, and that's why we talked about it yesterday, the day before, or the live session before. So many people overlooked the fuel thing. And I said that our simple little diagram that we went over last week, did that help you? He said, yeah, it was amazing. Breaking it down into 15-minute sections. We drew a circle. I actually showed him out of my notebook. It's a circle with 2 lines. So you got 15 minutes, 15 minutes, 15 minutes, 15 minutes. It's got your hour. You're burning 2 gallons, 2 gallons, 2 gallons, 2 gallons, right? And once he put just that simple thing into process and started making sure he was starting the time, stopping the time, just a little bit of help and a little bit of guidance, once he mentally thought through it, he said, oh man, I've been in the aircraft and I don't worry about it anymore because I've got it down in my head how many gallons I'm taking off with. I know a quick, simple way to think, I'm 15 minutes through the flight, I've burned 2, this is how many gallons I have left. So, and talking to him, he was telling me about the wind, right? All the stuff I've told him, he's repeating to me. And the wind is so important. And him getting through the communications because he's flying at Howard Airport, that's a lot of what was happening with him too. So the fuel, comms, wind, he was getting the totality of the circumstance, right? And learning to take what's really important for me right now, getting to solo. Right now, getting to solo was getting past these hurdles, which were fuel, communications, and keeping track of the wind. All of a sudden is impressing his instructor because he's worked on these things. That was just exciting to hear. Oh, here the next one's a good one. He brought this one up. Talk out loud. And Heather's keeping up without me even telling her. Talk out loud. He tells me this, and this isn't one that I came up with in our previous 2 discussions. He said, you know what else I started doing and my instructor really liked? He goes, I started talking out loud during startup and during the flight. And he said, my examiner, or his instructor said, man, nice job on getting verbal here. The examiner's going to love you for this. And he, I let him go, and I'm smiling as he's telling me this, again, because he came up with it. And I said, when I had a chance to talk, I go, kudos to your instructor for telling you that, because that's right. And I said, when I'm in the aircraft with somebody, I always encourage them to talk out loud. And it's talk out loud during your pre-flight. It's talk out loud during the startup. It's talk out loud while you're flying, doing your normal takeoff, doing your hovering. Because if you're talking, we're always prepping you for the check ride. Let's face it, this is what we're all trying to get to, is the day of your test. So if we get you one-on-one in the aircraft to talk out loud, the examiner knows what you're thinking. And I especially during the startup, okay? If you're sitting there in the helicopter and you're so focused on your checklist and you're going through and you're doing switches and stuff, but you're not talking, he's watching. He's looking over. He's looking at where's your finger at in the checklist. He's watching what you're doing, even if he's not saying anything. Eventually, he's probably going to start asking you questions because you're so quiet. And even if it looks like you know what you're doing, he doesn't really know for sure if you're not talking out loud, right? So when he said, I started talking out loud, and I was really happy when he told me that, and I was happy that his instructor confirmed that, and I'm looking for the word, praised him for that, because it's so important. Again, just think about the checklist startup. If you're talking during that private pilot check ride, and you're going, okay, yep, seatbelt's on. You got your seatbelt? Yep. All right, door's latched. Your door good? Yep. All right, let's see. Altimeter. All right, we're about 820 feet, and you dial it in. If you're talking during that startup and you got a nice flow going, typical examiner's probably not going to bother you because you really don't want to start somebody, or you don't really want to disturb somebody during a startup. It's like you really don't want to disturb somebody doing a pre-flight. And those of you that do that to people, it's kind of wrong. When somebody's pre-flight in the aircraft, leave them alone so they don't lose their spot in the checklist and don't get distracted and then have to rush their pre-flight. So talk out loud. I love that one. If you're not talking out loud, you should be. Even when you're by yourself or you're with your instructor, the more talking you do, the easier that private pilot check ride is going to go, because the examiner now knows what you're thinking. If, let's say you're setting up for a confined area on your private pilot check ride. If you're just flying around and acting a little hinky and you're just like looking around but you're not saying anything, he doesn't know what you're thinking. If you go, well, okay, I like to stay about 500 feet as I do my circles around my confined area. He's going to think, good, that's a good general rule, 500 feet above as you're making your circles. And as you're making your circles, you go, yeah, and I like to go fly around that confined area. Like, I like to make three great big turns while I'm setting up my downwind base and final and looking for obstacles and thinking about high recon, low recon. Oh, okay, good, right? If you're talking out loud, the guy knows what you're thinking. And the more you're talking, the less he's going to talk. So I was so thrilled to hear him talk out loud. And he gets credit, and his instructor gets credit on that one, because that's not a tip that I had given him. But I wanted to share it with all of you that's going to watch this video, because that really is a big one that I don't think I've ever even talked about. It's just one of those things that, well, I'll tell you this. Taz Chrisman, 2018 Flight Instructor of the Year. Friend of mine in our Hogs videos. I don't see him much really since COVID, but before that, we spent a lot of time together at different things, and he would always go, we would discuss how it's funny how many things come up in flight training that you've never talked about before or never even thought about, but are important. There's so much to all this. So that's why I love these small, easy tips. So number 7, I got Basic Private Pilot 101. And what that means is everything he was talking about when everything that he was saying that day, I said, it goes back to Basic Private Pilot 101. Like, it goes back to everything you learned in kindergarten. To hear him say it, I was really thrilled. He's like, it really goes back to the things we start learning as a private pilot. Those good techniques we learn as a student. That's what we really need to be focusing on. And he's going on, and I'm grinning the whole time, right? So as he's talking, I'm writing it down, because I'm going to give him praise when he's done. And I said, you know what? That's right. And I say it all the time. Brian Rutledge, our operations manager, and I talk about it all the time. It's about the basic knowledge and basic private pilot stuff and doing things right the way you were trained. So many people get in bad habits when they get past student, they get past private. Oh, Kenny's not around. I'm not doing my hovering square corners anymore. Screw that. I'm not clearing my tail anymore. Hey, Kenny's not watching. And I've heard this stuff, right? I hear it when my ex-students are out with somebody else and they'll come back and rat on them, right? Well, yeah, that guy's out flying a helicopter now and he can do whatever the hell he wants. But I'm thinking one guy in particular, super wealthy individual, who didn't take my advice and went out and toasted a helicopter and fried an over $1 million helicopter with 6 people on board flying in shitty weather where he should have never been out. He didn't learn that from me. What's my point? Lost my point. Are you listening to me, Heather? Where am I in that story? Anyway, it goes back to Basic Private Pilot 101. It's sticking with the things that we learn as a private pilot. And I get where it's going now. Another pilot, same guy, another deal, wealthy guy, a lot of money, gets what he wants, gets his way. I heard about him doing that stuff. And it's like, I don't train you these things so that the minute you get your private, you go, screw all that. I don't need that Mickey Mouse private pilot shit anymore. I'm just going to go do whatever the hell I want. That's not what it's all about, right? When I was trained, and I trained my students and encourage you all for your entire career, hover, pre-takeoff checks, 2-step process picking up, clear tail left, clear tail right every time. Either you clear it or you make your passenger clear it. Turn 90 degrees. Over here, stop, turn 90 degrees. Over here. So many of them go, I'm not doing that shit anymore. Well, you know what? When I was flying EMS, they did a study. They'd been in business 40-some years, and they said the people wrecking helicopters have over 15 years in EMS, over 10,000 hours in helicopters, and our biggest problem that we're having is people sticking tail rotors into hangar doors, trees, vehicles, going out to scenes, sticking their tail rotor into something. Professional pilots going out and wrecking the helicopters. They go, it's not the young guys. It's not the newbies coming in that are wrecking these aircraft. It's the guys that's been flying forever. That's who's wrecking them. So going back to the Basic Private Pilot 101, It's about learning about the wind, timing your fuel, knowing aerodynamics, hover pre-takeoff checks. And I battled this in my EMS career for 5 years. And you know what? There's a lot of great things that go on EMS. And maybe I'll do some videos. Haven't talked about that stuff in a while. There was so much good that went on in that industry. But there's also a lot of crap that should never go on. And it comes from professional pilots that do stuff that they shouldn't be doing. And they frickin' know better. Because you're flying EMS and you got 2,000 hours or 5,000 or 10,000 doesn't mean that you're just never going to have an accident and you can just forget all the basic private pilot stuff. Our head honchos were always coming down and sending us emails and going, guys, we hear you're not doing hover pre-takeoff checks. If we see it, you won't work for us anymore. Guys, we're here you're flying approaches too fast. If we catch you doing it, you won't be working for us anymore. All these kinds of things, because these guys go out and just do whatever. So it's basic private pilot 101. That's where it's at. All right, number 8. Heather's keeping up. Good job, Heather. Knowing the info and answering at the private pilot level. And in our next session, number 4, we're going to sit back and I'm going to start testing him, just throwing some questions at him as he was doing a check ride. And his admission is, well, I'm an engineer by trade, so I overanalyze everything, and I'm thinking about everything, and I'm grinning as he's telling me this. And I tell him, I go, I know what's going to happen. You're going to go to your check ride, and because you're an engineer and your background, you're going to want to tell him, if he asks you about retreating blade stall, it's going to be, yeah, you got the advancing blade, and it's flapping up due to increased lift, and you got the retreating blade, and due to less lift and angle of attack and all this, and you're going to want to go deep dive. And he's like, yeah, right. And I'm like, stop. That's not what I'm going to train you to do. On the private pilot check ride, it's knowing the information and answering at the private pilot level. It's not about proving the knowledge to the guy that's sitting across the table from you. It's about answering short and sweet, right? So if he says, what is retreating blade stall? You go, pause first, think about it. Everybody wants to go, oh, and they start answering. No, pause. And you go, it's when the retreating blade exceeds a critical angle of attack. And the examiner will go, okay, good. What are some things that might contribute to that? Pause. Oh, man, let's see. Well, high gross weight and high density altitude, those always affect everything. Sure. Examiner says, anything else? Yeah, low RPM, steeper abrupt turns, turbulent air. He's going to go, good, okay. What are you going to notice at the onset of retreating blade stall? Well, the helicopter's probably going to get some kind of an abnormal vibration, and then the nose is going to pitch up, and then roll. Then it's going to probably start to roll to the retreating side. The examiner's going to go, great, what's gyroscopic precession? Or probably go some other direction. It's private pilot level. He's not going to have you drawing diagrams and going, he could deep dive into it, but it's answering at the private pilot level. And we even talked about the new study guide because he's got his study guide copy on the way. And I said, it's just like when you go through the study guide put together by Brian Relich, our operations manager. I said, this thing is so detailed. I go, when you get your copy of it, read through it. This is awesome stuff, but don't think you have to memorize everything in there, because that book is over 400 questions, and Brian has every single little detail in there that relates to that topic. And let's use private pilot privileges and limitations. It's all in there. Brian has every single detail. Don't think that when he says, well, what can you do as a private pilot? Oh my gosh, I can do charity events, and if I'm an aircraft salesman with 200 hours, and da-da-da-da, and da-da-da-da, and da-da-da-da. Don't think that you got to go in and memorize and spout every single tiny little thing to the examiner. You don't do it that way. Here's what you do. You go, the examiner says, so what kind of things can you do for a private pilot? I told her, remember, I go, you're going to start off with something like, oh, well, private pilot rating, that's really just to, go out and fly for fun and take up your friends and family and, go fly for a hamburger or whatever. I go and leave it at that. And then he goes, well, what else can you do? Or maybe he'll ask a question. Maybe he'll say, can you do charity events? If he does, you go, you know what? I can do charity events. And I've read up on that. There's so many times per year they can take place, and you got to do this and you got to do that. I can, open up the FAR aim manual under Part 61 and show you. I can tell you detail what has to be done in order to do that. Okay, well, what else can you do? You want to start so simple, and you want to know these things, but you have to know them at the private pilot level. I've sat through all these check rides for years. Examiner won't let me do it anymore, but he did it for so many years. And he's well respected in the industry, been given check rides forever. And that's how he does a private pilot. It's very simple questions. They want to know that you know the information. And what they expect is to have a problem with terminology. And they don't even really get excited if you screw terminology up just a little bit. They get excited if you state something wrong. So you want to go slow. You want to take your time. You want to answer like you're going into court. And that's what we're going to be working on this next time. So this one is a little of what we're going to work on next time. I just want to touch base on that because, again, we teach all this stuff to you, and our HOGS courses has gotten pretty intense. And knowing as much as you can is always, always, always a good thing, right? But don't feel like you have to go in there as a technical expert on your private pilot check ride. You have to know what you got to do to keep yourself alive. And you have to know where to go find information. The FAR aim manual. Know how to use the FAR aim. And don't be like, I got to flip page to page to page. I told her, remember, I go, that's why one of the first videos in private pilot course is I show you the FAR aim and say, look, you got to be good with this. Take the time to learn the tabs, know where things are at. So when an examiner says, maybe he gets you stuck on something. And you go, you know what, I can go to the FAR aim and look it up. Many times they'll go, okay, show me. But they don't want you over there going, I've never opened this book before. I just carried it around because my examiner told me. No, know that FAR aim manual. Know what's in it and know how to quickly find things. You don't have to memorize the whole stinking manual. You got to know what's in it, and you got to know how to find them. Throat's getting dry. Better hurry up. So we talked about emergencies, and he said, he's getting ready for solo, and his instructor kind of got on him because he was asking him about, I think it was like electrical failure or something. And he struggled a little bit and didn't have it down right away. And he said, as an engineer, I started going through my mind, electrical circuits and da-da-da. And he said to me, eventually his instructor was like, hey man, you're overthinking this. I'm just asking a very simple question on this emergency. What I'm looking for is so you're making it way too difficult. And so we elaborated on that a little bit. And I said, that's one area where you do want to memorize, right? Emergencies you can't slack on. Emergency section for whatever aircraft you're flying is one that you need to have open, and you need to just do the work. On emergency stuff, you got to do the work. You have got to memorize this stuff because it has to be concrete in your mind. And I'll tell you, when I failed my private pilot check ride, FAA examiner, after he took a break at one point, and we went outside and talked. He tried to calm me down. And then we went back in and tried it again. And when he finally said, man, this is going to have to be a failure. I just can't pass you. And he was hard-nosed, but I appreciate the fact. It's why I'm sitting here right now talking to you, or this would have never happened without this failure. But he said, I'm an FAA inspector. I work for the FAA. I don't want to come out and investigate your accident. And he said, when I ask you about, something with power, I need to hear 30-20-10. Back in the day, it was 30-20-10. Now you say 30-20 and less than, ETL or whatever. But he said, when you're out there in that aircraft, you need to know this stuff that's going to get you in trouble and get you killed. You got to be able to do this, right? Because if you're struggling sitting across from me at the table, answering a question smooth and in a timely manner, what am I going to think you're going to do out in the aircraft when something bad happens and you're alone by yourself? If you can't converse with me here at the table, then how are you going to be able to handle that problem in the aircraft? And that's why he failed me. And it turned into my notebook, and it turned into the business I have today. I never started out to be the ground guy. It just happened. So number 10, because he brought up emergencies, and I said, yes, on this one, man, dude, this is the one you got to put the work and effort into, and you got to know them, and you have to memorize them. It's just memorization. You got to go through the emergencies. And number 10, I want to talk about Brad O'Dees. Brad, if you're ever out there, man, he was the dude that helped me get my private after my first failure. Eddie was my instructor, and we're still friends this day. Heck, I was in his wedding when he got married. He was the instructor with me when I failed my private. I finished somewhere else in a different aircraft. And it was Brad. And I remember, this is important. Brad, I remember getting ready for my second private pilot check ride. I failed number 1. I'm going into number 2. And I would go back to the local hotel at night, and I would study. So I'd fly with Brad. He's prepping me, getting me ready to go, getting ready to retest again. And I remember, I'd take my books with me every night to the motel. And I remember Brad just going, I'm like, God, I'm studying so many things. And he goes, Kenny, helicopter aerodynamics and helicopter emergencies. He goes, you already know how to fly. You got the requirements. This is your second test. He goes, all this other stuff, all that stuff, man, aerodynamics and emergencies. Know them, study them. That's what you need to focus on. We're this close. We're going to finish you up and get you done the second time. Helicopter aerodynamics and helicopter emergencies, know that stuff and know it through and through. And that came up in the conversation with my member when I said, that's right. You have to think about what's going to kill you. What's going to get you in trouble? How many anybody watch Forged in Fire? And Doug? It will kill. If anybody was watching, if you watch that, let me know. Anyway, it's about the stuff that's going to kill you. The private pilot examiner wants to make sure that you're knowledgeable. You know what's going to get you in trouble. And that's what I told our member on the aerodynamics. I go, he doesn't care about what the examiner is going to care about is the example I gave you. They want to know with any of these things, emergencies and aerodynamics, they want to know that what is it? Number 1, what is, let's use vortex ring state. What is it? A simple definition of what it is. What are you going to notice? You're going to notice, sinking sensation and maybe an aircraft shudder. All right, well, what are you going to do about that sinking? What is the correct procedure? This plays out on all this stuff. It's knowing what it is, how does it happen, what are you going to notice, and what are you going to do to recover from it? I guess I better see if anybody's got any questions out there because my throat's getting tired and I know I'm on a roll and I have no idea how long I've even been talking. But I hope if one person goes away from this video learning something that went, you know what, that just made it click for me. I'm just rambling and going crazy because I just wanted to get some of these things out because I told him, I even wrote it down, it's all about the real struggles. And that's what it's about. It's all the stuff that I've been through and all the people that I've trained with and all the stuff I've seen other people struggle with. It's like it all just comes back around, right? And most CFIs get a CFI and they teach for a few years, they get their hours and they move on. They don't ever teach again. I've always stayed current as an instructor. Even when I was flying EMS, I owned a helicopter and I was teaching on my days off, regardless of how well that turned out in the end. I've always kept current as an instructor, and I can tell you in the EMS environment, whenever we would do like check airman would come in for a 135 check ride, and a lot of times they would do 2 of us at the same time, give you an oral test, and they'd ask one of the other guys, and these check airmen learned that if that guy couldn't answer it, he'd look at me and I would answer. It's not because I'm smarter than those guys. It's because I stayed active as an instructor and I'm still teaching it and keeping it fresh in my mind. You get in the professional helicopter environment and you don't open the book anymore and you just go out and fly. It's very hard to let your skills slip away from you. And it's easy to let all this information slip away. And Brian Rutledge, our operations manager, will tell you, in law enforcement, he worked in law enforcement 25 years, and he worked as a trainer for airplanes and helicopters. And he said, it's the same thing in law enforcement that I complained about in EMS, about people not studying in open books. He goes, my law enforcement pilots, I got kick them in the side of the head to get them to open a book. They all want to go out and fly their patrol flights and then come back and sit and watch TV and eat and take a nap or do whatever. Nobody wants to crack the books. And Brian and I have had this discussion in the last 8 or 9 years. We've had this discussion so many times it's not funny. And Chuck Airman, buddy of mine, recently, he's in his 60s, recently retired from EMS. He did it for 40 years, and he always complained. He's like, dude, half these EMS bases, I should be shutting them down because these guys wait until the day before I arrive to start opening up the POH and study for a 135 check ride. He goes, and it's obvious in the classroom when they're not answering questions and they're stumbling, they start studying the night before. And I always tell them, dude, guys, for a year I was coming. Why don't you open the book for a week or an hour once a week to be refreshing this knowledge? And he said, if I did my job correctly and was hammering these guys for their knowledge not being where it was, I'd be shutting down half the bases. And he goes, and then we're already short pilots everywhere. What happens if I'm shutting down bases left and right over pilots' lack of knowledge? Kind of a no-win scenario there. All right, Heather, I'm going to take a break. Any questions that popped up, flight training-wise, I can answer?
No, lots of just thank yous, good content.
Brian's been in there. Good. Awesome. All right. Well, I hope that's been a help. I hope you take away one thing out of all that we talked about. Just remember, and that's what he said today. He's like, this stuff is not easy. And I go, you're right. And he goes, it takes a commitment. And I go, I know, you're right. And just so much. I was so proud of him. And I'm just doing some one-on-ones to help him along. But I just saw the things coming out of his mouth. And he goes, so it's about putting forth the effort. And I go, that's what it's about. And, he goes, well, I'm not the smartest guy on the planet. And I go, I'm not the smartest guy on the planet either. But it's going back to Private Pilot 101. Everything you learned in kindergarten, sticking with the basics of private pilot, doing things right. It takes effort. It's not that hard if you put in the time and the effort, I guess is what we're trying to get at. It's not rocket science. Anybody can do it. I know he's close to my age. He's in his 50s, and he keeps bringing that up. And I go, you know what? Quit bringing that up. I don't even want to hear about it. You can freaking learn just like anybody else can learn. And I told him I get pissed when people go, oh, you're 40. You're too old to fly. Bullshit. I hate that. God, I hate hearing that. Just makes me mad. All right. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. We're going to get out of here. Or I'm going to get off of here because I'm thirsty and my throat's about all I can take. Hope something helped you today. Stay tuned because I know there's more coming. Thank you for all the people that have actually emailed me and said, man, I'm digging these lives, and how it's getting people to communicate with each other even in chat. Heather's comment, how many people helping each other out, and Brian jumps in and helps some people. So we'll do our best to keep giving you some great content and keep you coming back. So do us a favor. Give us a thumbs up, and we'll see you in the next video.
Live to fly another day. Helicopterground.com.
Peace out.